Unfortunately, we are not talking about snacks for the rest of the night, but we are talking about Notion, which I know we're all very excited about, and hopefully everyone who has joined is excited about as well. Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Thank you for coming to our virtual home. You're going to be hearing from some really lovely, smart people tonight, as well as your distant admins. So we'll just jump right into it. Those admins are these folks. We're waving right now. I'm Bianca. I'm a freelance brand strategist and copywriter. You'll be hearing from Beth tonight, who is a designer at Landscape. Tim is going to be our MC, and he's an art director and photographer. And Nick is also on our call, and he is a designer at One Design. So tonight, what all are we doing? We're going to give you a little brief on what Distant is, if you're unfamiliar. We're going to tell you what this series is. Can I show you something? What we'll be talking about tonight, as well as a handful of speaker presentations from our members. And if you have burning questions after you see what they have to say, we'll have the opportunity to share and get some responses. So first things first, what is this thing called Distant? Distant is a vibrant, vulnerable digital community that inspires easygoing exchange. It's composed of a diverse set of makers, artists, and creatives, industry, years of experience, point of view, and career ambitions considered. It's a space where people can learn from each other and learn with others, find new potential collaborators, develop friends to lean on, and all possible while we can't connect in real life now and whenever that remains true in the future. We started Distant in the summer of 2020 and launched our first beta phase in January of 2021, made it all official November 2 years ago, I think. And then today we have exactly 238 members on Slack. That's 71 more than the last time we had a Can I Show You Something event, which is really cool. I'm actually going to pass the mic over to our MC to tell you more about what we're doing here tonight. So Tim, if you want to take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, Bianca. So getting into what it is, Can I Show You Something? It's a quarterly showcase of the unique ways Distant community members utilize specific digital tools. This has been a beautiful way for us to kind of get together and showcase, honestly, like some of the talent through like some of these tools that we all kind of use every day. We've done 2 so far. So this is our 3rd. We did Arena and Google Workspace, which I think people should check out if they haven't yet. But welcome to the 3rd installment. Getting into what tonight's topic is, we are going to be talking about Notion. So we're going to talk about all the things through Notion. It's a tool that blends apps into one. It's an all-in-one workspace for you and your team. So let's get into speakers, I think. So whether you're a Notion Pro, looking for tips, or have ever dabbled yourself, we have our members here: Nevin McRay, Carolyn LaLonde, Lindsay Noll, Beth Vande Griend, and obviously Bianca Smith. We have them here to take us through the ways that they use Notion to enhance their lives, whether that be personally and creatively. So getting into our first presenter, we have Nevin McRay, a casual archivist, a chronic hobbyist, and a producer. He's currently leading projects in product design, animation, and technical exploration at Hobbs in Detroit. He's got you in your search of the perfect burger, fascinated about food science, or interested in the future of spatial archiving. So we're going to pass it over to you, Nevin, to get into your slides.
Should probably unmute. How's it going? Thanks for the intro. And yeah, super excited to chat through some of the stuff. Notion has been like something I've been super into for a long time, and it's been cool to see it grow over the past couple of years. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about NevNotes, which is what I like to call my Notion workspace. And, you know, as Tim mentioned, I like to call myself a casual archivist, which to me just means that I have like a million tabs open on my Chrome every day. And so Notion over the years has helped me kind of, I don't want to say fix it because I still do that, but I think it allows me to be able to dump those tabs every once and so often and put them into a useful place and not necessarily like feel like I'm losing something every time my computer shuts down. So I'm here to talk a little bit about my workspace. And there are going to be a lot of other talented people talking about how they use like all the capabilities of Notion. So that, you know, talking about relational databases, AI integration, and, you know, API stuff. But I'm just going to be talking about how they even approach Notion, because I think that was one of the most daunting things for me when I was starting several years ago. So first, I'm going to start with a few quick tips. The first one being use emojis because they're fun, but also use them because I think it's taken for granted how useful they can be in both breaking up visually pieces of content, but also like providing a little bit of you know, contrast in your stuff. So use it. I also like to make sure to treat my Notion like a dumping ground and trying not to be too precious with design, whether it's being like you know, something that I just drop a bunch of links in a certain page, or so anytime they're using it, especially internal pages, I like to treat it like a dumping ground. Another thing that I learned pretty early on was only nest pages when it's needed, because accessibility is key. And I think that it's like really easy to be like, you first open up your Notion, be like, all right, great, I'm gonna like do a page within a page, and because these are two different thoughts, I'm going to make it another page and make it. And I think it's really easy to get caught up in that, but making it easily accessible both for yourself and for other people who might be like using your database or your workspace. It's really important that everything is front and center, easy to understand, and also like easy to access, so you can use them more. Other tip is get the Notion app. And I'm an iOS user, so I don't know about Android, but I know that it's really easy on iOS to be able to, even if I never touch the Notion app ever, having the integration within my share function on like integrated in iOS to be able to say like, okay, this link or this piece of text or this photo, automatically being able to send it to a specific page within your noted workspace, your Notion workspace is super helpful. Use Notion AI. That's something that's pretty recent as far as the integrations go. And I think it's been really helpful for me to be able to like summarize pieces of text, make text shorter or more playful or whatever. And it can also just like look at a block of text and pull out action items from it. So definitely use it if you can. And then the last thing is create meaningful buckets for yourself to stay organized and clear. Don't overthink. And I think this is kind of gonna be the crux for my whole chat here, is talking about these buckets. So the hardest thing when you open up your Notion is looking at this blank page and saying, okay, I can start with an empty page, or I can start with a table or board or timeline count. I don't know what any of this means, and I don't even know how to get started, right? I think it's really hard to know where to get started, or just to have like 30 pages all on one page where you don't really have a way of organizing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the way that I organize my Notion and why it works for me. And then I'll provide some alternatives if maybe it doesn't work for you. So I use the pair method, which is basically every page falls into these 4 buckets. The first one being projects, second being areas, third is resources, and last is archive. So projects. The way that we define projects is a series of tasks linked to a goal with a deadline. And I think the main crux here is a deadline. It's really easy to find similarities in these buckets, but I'll try to bold out some of the ones that really define why you would use one over the other. In this case, it's with a deadline. So here you can kind of see like my projects, or one of the views of my projects databases, and that kind of shows is all the different categories of projects that I work on. I'm actually not super great about using my projects, but in this case, like all of these are ones that I've been able to use pretty well. And then this right here is kind of an example of what a project might be. In this case, I was moving to the apartment I'm currently in, and I wasn't really sure the best way to line out all of my to-do items and categorize them, along with like links on stuff that I wanted to do. You can kind of see there's a TikTok in there about how to I don't know, some tip at some point. This was a couple of years ago, but it's a time-based project, and then the resources to go along with it. Another example is kind of like the short film idea, or a treatment around an animated short film. And you can kind of see like I was able to add on, you can throw in mood boards and style it, or you can create a concept around a script and version it out. And there's like a lot of great capabilities for projects, and being able to like go deep within this kind of like nesting situation I talked about earlier. So the next section is areas. So this is a sphere of activity to be with a standard to be maintained over time. And the kind of like key phrase here is being maintained over time. And the way that I like to think about these are, they're all kind of like trackers. You'll see on this one specifically is kind of like my library, or the books that I'm reading. And I like to kind of do a little book report every time that I finish a book. And with each of these, I kind of try to do I try to have like mental triggers associated with with adding a new entry or adjusting an entry. And for this one in particular, it's every time I finish a book, I'll go in and add an entry, or I'll anytime I start a book, I'll go in and add an entry. Those are things that I try to use to like start thinking about this. And then it's also nice to use these for things that you might forget about. This one is a car maintenance tracker. So it's like a relational database across my car's manual, and tells me like how long it's been since I've gotten my oil changed, or what that last time that I got a flat repaired at the place down the street, it really sucked. So maybe I'll go to a different place next time. All of those are like really useful for me. And the last one is resources. So I try to think of these as guides for topics or themes of ongoing interest. In this case, this is like my main dumping ground, and I try to use this either as a guide for myself or for other people. I think it started out with, it's really helpful to have a place for everything. That makes you feel like you don't have to like hold on to all these tabs all the time. And then another thing about it is that you can learn a lot more, either about yourself or about other people, or even about understanding your own process through the process of teaching. So this is an example of my like Detroit City Guide that I started a few years ago. And I think as I started to build it out, I started to see some trends, and I started thinking about the rabbit holes that I was really interested in. You can kind of see at the top right that I started to dive deep into, what's the best burger in town? What are the like easiest places to pick up? And nesting really allows you to have the opportunity to dive deep into like peeking into other rabbit holes. And this is kind of another example of like documenting your own process can really help you learn about how you approach something. And I don't even necessarily think about how I water my plants, but when I am away for a month and I need to write out a guide on, hey, maybe can you help me out with watering my plants? It really helped me think about how I approach it. And then the last one's pretty self-explanatory. It's an archive, which is just you dump all the stuff that you're done with. And that's super helpful for me. So this is the pair method. This is how I approach it. And these are kind of like the pseudonyms for each one of them. Projects being deadline-based, trackers for areas, resources are guides, and then archives is all the old stuff. So here, that's the method that works for me. Here are some alternatives if you guys are interested in diving deep into the rest of them, but that is it for me. Thanks so much for your time, and I'll pass it on.
Wow, that was amazing. We're gonna pass it off to Carolyn, but yeah, I will never be that organized. That was amazing.
Thanks.
Okay, so now we're going to Carolyn LaLonde, um, a designer, writer, and morning person living in New York. She's currently building brands in service of social good at Landscape. And in her free time, she enjoys reading books, arranging flowers, and making lists. So I'm going to pass it off to Carolyn to take us through.
Thanks. Hi, thanks, Tim. Yeah, I'm Carolyn. I do all that stuff, and I also use Notion, apparently very vocally because they asked me to talk about it. But I mostly use Notion to make lists, other useful things like finance and health and wellness and stuff. I'm not really showing any useful stuff, more fun stuff. But yeah, list making, it's really fun. I think Nevin touched on this, but like get stuff out of your head and onto paper. So it's like a little easier to think out loud than up in your head. And so yeah, talk you through some lists. I will say list making has a very like storied history that I care about, we don't have to talk about, but I will mention Umberto Eco, this guy. He's like the patron saint of list making, if there ever was one. He studied semiotics, but he makes lists mostly. And he literally like did a residency at the Louvre all about list making. And I won't go here, but he like, we won't dive into it, but he's like believes that lists are like the only way to comprehend infinity, and like we love life and lists are life. And so we make lists because we hate death, and everyone should make more lists if you want to live well. I subscribe to his theories, but I'll leave that there just as a preface. But so before we look at some of my lists, I found a way to shoehorn in the Dewey Decimal System, and so I had to. My favorite list ever. I love the Dewey Decimal System. If you're a dear friend of mine, you probably know it. I'll preface this by saying that the creator of the Dewey Decimal System is problematic, and the American Library Association has spent a lot of time canceling him and undoing the biases that he baked into this system. So that being said, I highly support the more updated version of the Dewey Decimal System, but this is a really awesome list and my favorite one, and one that informs a lot of the work that I do in Notion. And that's because it was built to capture like every piece of information ever, which is a really crazy brief. But it's also been engineered to answer questions instead of like tackle tasks, if that makes sense. So like every one of these topics is mapped back to a question that kind of illustrates the way that we move through the world. You can kind of start to see where things might get like controversial. The librarians are kind of pissed that how did I get here leads to religion and not science, etc. But leaving that to the side, not getting too wound up in the details, I do think it's really helpful to think about how something that you're doing might answer a question, or like a lot of us are designers, so like solve a pain point, if you want to call it that. But yeah, that's how I think about making lists. I could give a whole presentation on the Dewey Decimal System, but I swear there's Notion on the next slide. So we'll get to that. But yeah, this is something that I keep in mind, and that is really interesting if you're looking to learn about weird stuff. It also has a very weird and kind of crazy history. Anyways, so lists. I use Notion to organize my library, and you'll notice I don't use the Dewey Decimal System. It's a source of inspiration. I'm just a fan. Also, all of my books fall under like two categories. But I created this list to answer the question about like how can I borrow books with my friends. I have used a bunch of different reading trackers and apps and stuff, and they all kind of prioritize the books you've read over like the books you've owned, which is probably a good thing because I think it's important to borrow books. But I graduated school like a year and a half ago and started to own things. And so now I have this big collection of books that just kind of sits on my shelf when I'm done with it. And so I made this to send to my friends so that they can borrow my books and read stuff that I like and save some money. And it's really helpful. I think Notion's really nice because you can organize things in multiple different ways. And I think some friends down the line get into like different views more specifically, but like one example is that I have a list view, and then I also organized my books visually. So you can kind of like, my friends can like shop my bookshelf in a way. There's also there's no like secret code. I'll be honest. Like I sit in Figma and I make a little thumbnail every time I buy a book. So I don't have like a hack in that sense, but I can send you the template and you can use it. But I love working this way. Like I said, I don't use the Dewey Decimal System to organize my library because it's such a small collection. So it's organized by books that I've read and books that I haven't read in alphabetical order. And I find that works for me. So that shows up in Notion, and it also shows up like physically on my bookshelf. They're in the same order, which just makes it really easy to parse and sift through, and gets me to like go pull something off my shelf if I haven't read it, instead of like going down to one of the many bookstores in Brooklyn. But yeah, this is one way that I use Notion. I think it's really helpful, but you could apply this kind of type of thinking to lots of different things. I have friends who have like replicated their closet in this way, or like other kind of collections. Nevin's book to cataloging. I think that's really an interesting way to use Notion. It's obviously like a really robust tool that you can use to like tackle huge projects and like goals or whatever. But it's also a really helpful space to just like make sense of what you have there. Most of my Notion is like incriminating information. But like I have a finance tracker where I have like a list of all of my assets that I own, with like receipts and prices, and it looks just like this, but it's like AirPods instead of books. But it would be helpful in like the event of an insurance claim or something like that. So yeah, I would say in terms of like the categories we talked about earlier, I usually fall in the realm of like resources and guides over like large scale project type stuff. But it's really a helpful way to use Notion, and you can kind of use this sort of template to do lots of things. The second example that I have is a new one. The question here was, how can me and my friends have fun in New York for free? Everything is so expensive. And the answer was going to museums in various free ways that I can share with you if you're curious. But yeah, there's a lot of museums in New York. And so earlier last month, March, my roommate and I put together a list of all of them. If you look for an official list online, it's closer to 150, but I took out all of the historical rock places where you can go look at a plaque. So these are just the museums. So if you want this list, I can send it to you. But yeah, we've only visited like 2 museums last month, but really fun stuff. And this is like the same, I literally duplicated my initial library template and switched some of the categories and filled it out this way. So I think that's another helpful tip, is that Nevin shared that like empty screen. I've never seen that before. I duplicate everything all the time. I've never seen a blank screen on Notion because I've never not started with a template or some sort of like duplicated version of something I made before. I recommend that. It's also nice for consistency, but yeah, that's a great way to kind of get around the learning curve, because it can be really tricky at first. So yeah, we use this. I also like I'll go back and add like little photos of what we saw and stuff. Almost like a journal. I used to journal a lot when I was younger, but not so much anymore. And so Notion has kind of filled that space in some ways. I know that you hop on Notion, there's lots of like pre-made templates. There's like personal templates that'll offer you spaces to like write or do habit tracking or like all sorts of cool stuff like that. And I think that's another really cool application of Notion. Notion pitches itself as like a personal workspace, but I think most of the tutorials and content that I've seen around it is like pretty professionally oriented, which is also really useful. But yeah, definitely a great way to kind of take control or organize your personal life a little bit more, and make things more fun. I love tracking stuff, and yeah, looking at it that way, you can like make a a list for anything. So yeah, I'll end there, but if you want to talk about the Dewey Decimal System privately, I'd love to do that, or do a chat about it next, but I will hand it back to Tim if I can.
Yes, thank you so much, Carolyn. That was beautiful. I also think I speak for so many people in the chat. We need templates, so send them our way. Now we're gonna kick it off to Lindsay. Lindsay Noll is an independent product manager and digital designer living and working in New York City. Her primary focus is to help define the vision for digital products and create process to allow for optimal collaboration between strategy, design, and development teams. So without further ado, Lindsay.
Thank you. Can you guys see my screen okay? Sorry to be the guy that has to ask. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm Lindsay. So fun to be here. I say this to everyone, but I'll talk about Notion to literally anyone who will listen. I am like kind of in a weird space, maybe not for the distant community, because we're all kind of like hybrid everything creatives, but I sit in this weird space of being both a designer and a very mega type A project manager. So I feel like Notion kind of blends both of those things in the same way that like my brain works, where there's like the more aesthetic, designy, free thinking, free form, creative, very concerned with design side of my brain. But then there's, part of my brain that also is like very precise. And I want things to be like really neat and tidy and orderly and rationalized and make sense. So I feel like Notion does such a great job of balancing both of those things that are obviously such huge, like, I don't know, drivers of a tool that I want to use, that I like will actually invest in, and that I will actually like keep consistent with using. So what I'd like to talk about mostly is actually how I use it for work. So I know a lot of people use it mostly as like a personal workspace, but my first introduction to Notion actually was through my previous employer, which was Studio Freight, which is like a smaller design studio. And they were already using it when I joined the team. And it was a lot more of like just kind of the wiki format of basically like, here are some pages, we have these organized like per client or per project or per scope. And we just kind of drop things in here as we need them. So like maybe there's a timeline, maybe there's like a page for notes, maybe we're tracking some of the things that a client has passed off to us. But it was just really hard for me to kind of come in and understand like, okay, like where do I find things? It's different, between every single project. Some of our naming and titles were really weird. Nobody knows where to look for anything. So like, people on the team are constantly pinging me as the PM to be like, hey, like, where'd you drop this? Where'd you drop that? And then also like the time suck that comes along with having to like create a page. So if I'm like jumping into a situation where I need to document something, like kind of having to think about like, how do I want to structure this? Do I need this to be a template? Like getting into all of that was super hard. So all of those things kind of like leveled up to like, we need to create, I think, a better system for this where things just feel a little bit more consistent and more predictable. And that way, like clients aren't pinging me, the internal team isn't pinging me to find things that like, could just be standardized a little bit more. So the answer to that worked, I think, pretty well for us was to basically create these like sub-page project dashboards within like a greater database where every client has this kind of like front page, if you will, or like a little command center where, similar to things that like Nevin had organized, where it's like you keep all of the hot links, close to the top. So in this case, like all of the consistent things that we needed on a project for like our timeline, our Figma, our meeting notes. We did a lot of web work. So like allocating a space where we are listing out all of the tools and platforms that we were going to need to work with once we got into the development phase, thinking about QA and then eventually handoff. And then all of the documentation that a client is like throwing at you in the middle of a project, like, oh yeah, we have that here, we have this here, just having kind of like a set space in the middle where we could kind of dump those docs. And then as you scroll down the page, we've got like a page tracker once we get into design and development phases. And then you can't see it here, but even beneath that, we had like the overall project scope so that you could see it kind of this like 10,000 foot view. Like, okay, I know exactly where I am. Identity has like 9 out of 10 things done. Now we're moving into web, whatever it might be. So creating all of these things kind of like answered to a lot of those problems that we were having when it was just kind of like dumping things wherever we could. And creating this structure and allowing us to have this kind of like max state as a template inside of our Notion meant that like once my biz dev, manager was signing a project, I can just click a plus icon and this whole thing is like set up without me having to think about it at all. So definitely would recommend looking into any of the documentation that they have on the actual Notion website. It's a little tricky, I'm not gonna lie, to get used to like dealing with the templates. It's not my favorite part of Notion's user experience, but it is really helpful once you figure it out. But again, just to kind of reiterate some of these things, like keeping really consistent naming. I actually think Nevin mentioned this too. Like, don't call it something kitschy, don't call it something branded, call it something that you can like really easily like search. And like using those icons is kind of the mental model of like, I don't even have to read anything. If I'm going for the meeting notes, I know to look for the cute little composition notebook, keep everything neat and tidy. And then eventually like the output of that, even though I was organizing all of this in the headspace of like, how can this work better for my team? It actually became this really great shared space that we could just like send over to all of our client partners, pin it in your Slack channel and say like everything that we create, everything that we track is going to be linked in this one command center. And it kind of like changed the dynamic, honestly, of some of our client relationships where it felt like this huge sense of trust had been created of like, okay, they're really on their shit, which for a small studio is really important. But just making it really feel like you're in good hands, you know where everything is, you have great visibility into a project, you know exactly how it's going, and you don't have to feel like you're questioning things or hunting me down for a link if you need it. So just to kind of give like a little tour, some of the pages that I felt like were most helpful for me as a PM were these meeting notes specifically. What I would do is every time we had a meeting, I just basically have a blank page template. I think this is a GIF, so it's huge. So if it's loading weird or really slow, sorry if it looks kind of wonky, but basically what I would do is create a page for every meeting that we have. That way I have the date, I have the purpose, I can put in who was there on our team. And then we also use this tool called Loom, which is specifically for like recording meetings. It's really great actually to use async, but I would record all of our meetings and then drop the link to that inside of the page for notes as well. And that way, if my creative director or someone couldn't be a part of it, they could basically like get the whole download of a meeting afterwards, which was great. We also created these kind of set dashboards for handoff as well. So one of the weird kind of pain points of working at a studio where, we do identity, strategy, web design, development, those are all really like inconsistent things that you eventually need to hand over to your client. So it became this weird point of friction of like, again, I feel like I'm bombarding them with like 3,000 links in a Slack channel. So just kind of creating this nice little house for everything to be like really neat and tidy for packaging things up to deliver, so that at the end of a project, I could say like, great, here's every single line item that was in the scope with the link to the final deliverable. So you can see that it's done. There's great visibility into it. But then you can also share this with your internal team to basically like not, again, have to hunt me down for a link to anything ever again. It's all nice and organized based off of like category of what we handed off. One of the other great things that kind of came about as using Notion as more of like a command center and like a shared space for clients is we would create these kind of like media kits a lot of times at the end of a project, specifically when we were doing like identity and web work. just to kind of have like a nice, almost like public facing place for us to put these brand assets so that the client could like link it inside of their footer on their website or share it out to external partners, where we put like the really high level client or like public facing information into this single page that almost feels like a mini website. But the great thing about this is like they could then share it with people on their team who like weren't design oriented, who couldn't jump into a Notion to like download a logo, or, you know, were just lazy and maybe didn't want to sift through like 30 folders in a Dropbox. So we eventually just started creating these sub pages inside of the media kit where we could drop like all of the graphics that we made. Like they were kind of organized similar to Carolyn's library, where each gallery card had like a title, like the logos, the icons, the posters. Again, these gifts are huge. So I feel like we're barely working our way through this one page, but here's like a page of all the graphics so that if someone on like social or whatever team like needs something and we don't maybe trust them to get into our Figma, they can come in here and like download it directly. But it's still like more visual and fun and engaging as opposed to, again, like a Dropbox or a Google Drive folder. And then now that I do not work for Freight anymore, I have kind of translated that same structure into a freelance dashboard for myself. So again, using that same kind of structure of like put your hot links in the top left, you know, organized by buckets, and then have this really nice like view in a database down below. Redacted, very sensitive information down here. Just kidding. But I found that it translates actually really well to that use as well. I've only been freelancing since like October or November, so I'll let you know how it scales. But for the most part, I think just, you know, having a consistent space outside of my like personal stuff to just always be able to drop in new pages as I think of things. Like, for example, in my like docs and templates, I've got offerings in here where I've basically just started to list out all of the categories or disciplines of work that I'll do. And that has actually become a really nice tool for like dropping to a prospective client if we're going to work together, to say like, just read through my Notion page. It has like all of my services, and it kind of acts as like a mini website without me having to like get in the details of like designing my website, which I will never do. I also keep a page of like easy Notion templates that I created at Studio Freight and just brought over to kind of like eventually recycle them into things that I might need. I also keep track of some like financial stuff in here. I have like an opportunity tracker, which is kind of just morphed into like anytime I see a really interesting like job posting or something that I think I might want to, you know, connect or talk to someone about, I'll just drop it in there. And then I keep a page called Daydreaming, which is like my high level thoughts on like why I wanted to start as a freelancer. And like, as cheesy as it sounds, I've like revisited a couple times when I'm like, why the fuck am I doing this? To be like, okay, yeah, no, these are still things that I love and want and should be like prioritizing more. And then the project tracker has just been really helpful to kind of like drop things in at a glance to understand like what is the budget compared to like hours a week that someone might need me. You can kind of see I have different views in here as well. So I could switch over to the calendar view and see like how things are stacking up, which like if you're just taking on smaller engagements can be really helpful to understand like, am I going to be at capacity if I take on another project, or am I good to go? So within that, within the project tracker specifically, this is a little meta, but I have a really similar format for each of those projects as well. So basically that same like client example that I had at Freight is how I'll set up a page as well if I'm like taking on an engagement that actually is like start to finish, like design, you know, I'm really like the designer on something through and through, as opposed to things where I'm PMing. I usually am kind of forced into just using whatever tools the team uses. So this I've only gotten to use like 1 or 2 times, but even in like since November, the updates that Notion has made for like, you can kind of see these little toggles off to the left under the items on project status. you can now create like nested layers inside of a database for subtasks, which has been hugely helpful. All of these little kind of optimizations that they've snuck in the last like few months have been so helpful. So yeah, super mega Notion fangirl. This has been really great so far. I'm excited to like continue to evolve it, but in general, just kind of thinking, and again, I think Nevin, you said a lot of this, but thinking about things and like, how can I make it, you know, UX heuristics, like clear, findable, usable, like learnable, and then just kind of delightful as well, like injecting little things for you to find later has been really great. And yeah, that's it. Here's my, you know, social if you want to follow along. Again, I'll talk about Notion to anyone who will listen. So hit me up.
Wow, that was beautiful. Hit Lindsay up. I will definitely be bugging you about Notion soon. But now we're gonna kick it off to Beth. Beth Vande Griend is a multidisciplinary designer living, working, and running around in Chicago. She's currently building brands in service of social good at landscape and is one of our cherished distant admins. So gonna pass it over to you, Beth.
Thank you for the cute intro. Yes, hello, I am Beth. I'm excited to continue to tell people about my favorite things and getting other people to do them as well through this platform. For Notion, I used to use Notion a lot for work when I was overworked, underpaid, couldn't keep things straight. And so that happened. And then I got a new job and my life was a little bit better. I fell upon this like meme or screenshot or whatever about the 4 types of wealth. So there's financial wealth, social wealth, and then time wealth and physical wealth. And what I'm excited to talk about today is the time wealth and the physical wealth that I find through Notion. I'll walk you through 4 different areas. Similar to Marie, they're more personal and help me keep my brain straight and add a lot of like joy and delight to my personal life. So those 4 different things are found in my favorites. If you have the Notion app on your phone, you can also, I should have put this in my presentation, and of course my phone's dead, so I can't show you. But there's a widget for the iPhone and you can put that on your home screen and you can link your favorites. And so I have these 4 favorites. Well, usually I don't have the oatmeal one on there, but I put it back in here for today. So we're going to talk about a to-do list, meal planning quotes, because it's not like your traditional meal planning. And then my garden, which I am starting, and then something about my dog. So first of all, a to-do list. I'm going to pop back out here. My to-dos are, I like to keep these streamlined where a week at a time, starting on a Monday. So like week of April 3, add a cute emoji. I'll tap into here and have things segmented from Monday through Friday and then the weekend. And these are things that don't live in my calendar, are not work related. Yeah, those are the 2 things. Like I'll toss things on my calendar, like I'm going to a concert on Friday. I don't need to add that to my to-do list. But there's things like shipping an art piece or finishing this deck. And with Notion, what you can do is you can hit the cute little app button, and then it'll drop down and you can link to a date, a person, or a different page. So like tomorrow, I actually have not done this and probably will not do this after this meeting because everything is closed. So what I can do is just delete that and remind myself tomorrow. It was raining, so didn't plant my seeds today. We're very flexible with my to-do list, but that's how I use this, and it's really straightforward and a fun entry point into everything, because I feel like a lot of the ways I use Notion stems from like bulleted lists and like using templates over and over again as a common theme that we're seeing throughout this presentation. Our second thing that we're going to look at is a meal planning doc. And this isn't a meal planning of like, I'm gonna eat this on breakfast, lunch, dinner on Monday. It's not like however many, like 21 meals. I live alone, I live at home, I work from home, and there will be times during the day where I'm like, I don't have any time to do this, / I don't know what I'm making. And also like, what am I getting for groceries? So this meal planning page I have been using since, I believe, actually, let's scroll down, since February, and I love it. It stemmed from my grocery list, which, surprise, looks like my to-do list. Emoji, title, things to get. I also have like a next time where I'll drop things when I like run out of diamond crystal salt. I'll add it to this like next time. I need to update this. I was not prepared. I already did this grocery shopping, and there's at one point, like, this is another thing I'll touch on later. I started like dropping on dollar signs. That was too much work. Not like, I'm not going to keep that up. So that's grocery lists, and how that connects back to the meal planning. So each week I have I'll just duplicate this section, which you can see here highlighted in blue. I have this is in the board. Yeah, the layout is board, which has been working well for this page. It's gone through a couple fluctuations, but I feel like I found this like sweet spot, where I have a breakfast, a lunch, a dinner, dessert, and also snack section. And so you can add in like, I don't know, like cake, and then turn on a cake emoji. And you can use it like, that's as simple as it gets. I'm not like diving into any of these tabs. I'm just like looking at what I've saved. Oh, another reason why I made this is because I store recipes literally everywhere. I store them in Arena in like a board that's about food. I have my Instagram saved. I have my New York Times like recipe box. There's too many things in too many places. And so what I'll show you and what I'm like linking here. So there's like this that says cake and Vin Loon's ice cream. There's no little arrow on that emoji, but there is an arrow on this emoji, because if I click into this and I click this, it is linked in a database in my meals and recipes, which is embedded up here by ingredients and by grocery lists. So meals and recipes, where are they? Here's a URL. Here are my tags. Here's how much time it took. And here's a rating, which I'll add after I've eaten things. So I'm making this week, and I do not know how to pronounce it, but it's an Iranian dish. I think I'm going to say it's an entree. I forgot to add this in. I think it's vegetarian, but we'll see. But I can click in if I really want to, like, I like the New York Times cooking app UI. So I usually go in there. But if I don't like the UI of where I found this recipe, or if it's like I transcribed one from a TikTok the other day and I added that in here, but I have all the ingredients, all the prep. And I'm not building this every time. Oh no, I clicked one of them. This is really good. Yeah, this has also been encouraging me to find new recipes, but I'll go down here to my little template. I'll click, I'll hit duplicate. I'll open it. I'll drop in a cute photo. I'll enter everything in here. I've got my like little tabbies ready. So usually I'll do this on the weekend before I'm going grocery shopping. And then I got fancy where I'm like, oh, do I want to see a different view of like galleries, seeing all the snacks and all the good things, like if I'm in a more visual mood. I haven't really used these yet, but I thought it was nice if I'm like thinking about different, I don't know, I want to explore and build out the tabs, like the tags section. There's only salad, soups, and desserts, but there's a lot more here. Anyways, that's the meals and recipes. And what you can do in the meal planning area is you can go in, again, hit your little @ button, and let's add in, do I have something called potato? Yeah, there you go. It's linked there. But I'm not eating that this week. last thing I'll touch on here is like leftover. That's fun. Like I went way too hard in this template like early on and got like my eyes were bigger than my stomach, and I added too many things and bought too many groceries, and so things can like go week to week. So like pasta with chopped pesto and peas, that was from this week. It went over here. I've been freezing things a lot too. That's not about Notion, but everyone freeze your leftovers. It's great. One last thing, and then I'll like hop to my next thing, is transparency about like going too big and then being like, I don't want to do that anymore. I thought I was going to be really cool and like itemize everything and like keep stock of what I have in my pantry. And that is not something that I maintained. I did start a pretty hefty list though, and I thought I would be able to like calculate the serving cost, but that's too much work. But if anybody wants to do that, that's there. You can add in ingredients. Like I have properties hidden somewhere. Oh, it's not in this one. Yeah, I hid the properties. If I ever want to do it again, I can go in here and add in this, and essentially it would like calculate. But again, I did not want to do that. Moving into number 3 is my garden, where I have a index, a plant directory, and a task list. So I've been diving into building a patio garden. And so I have like a place to dump all the resources and notes. I can use my like table of contents to jump to a place. And that can be like a link or a chat and like really rough notes, X, Y, and Z. But then again, bringing in like a table view to see all the plant directory and all the information, including like when to sow, which you can like there's like tables. And then I believe I have like a frost calendar, slash in my journal, someone had a question about like a Gantt chart or a timeline. This is about my first batch of like harvesting. And so I have a timeline in which you can adjust the dates and you can like move things and see when you're supposed to harvest and like set reminders and everything. I feel like I'm like running over time. So I'm gonna like speed this up and go into my last thing, but very excited about my garden. Follow me on Instagram if you want garden content. Lastly, I think this is my most like shared Notion doc, and it's about my dog. This is not Oatmeal, but it is a very cute GIF that I found online. This is Oatmeal, and I share this with anyone who's watching my cute little dog. Again, table of contents, super useful when you have a lot of information in one document. Contact info, open it up, love a toggle. Meals, water, add the emojis, add some imagery. Again, toggle. Do you want some routes? I have some routes. You don't live where I live. There you go. If she eats something she shouldn't, here are instructions. But anyways, I feel like this is pretty self-explanatory now, but I think that's it for me. I'm going to pass it off to Bianca.
Hey, I'm Bianca. I'm going to intro Bianca though. Bianca is a writer, strategist in Chicago, impacting brands by crafting clear and compelling stories. While her big 3 are all earth signs, she recently took a risk and opened her own creative practice, Good Sense Consulting. She is the loving mother of 2 cats, Pearl and Norman, and an avid Alex G fan. Same, honestly. She currently is on an It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia binge, and is certain pasta sauce should never be called gravy. And also same. I'm gonna pass it off to Bianca to go through how she uses Notion.
Thanks, Tim. Fighting words about the sauce. If anybody wants to meet me at the park later to duel it out, let me know. Well, thank you for hanging on until now. We have until 8:30, but I know it's getting late. I promise this will be short and sweet and is more of an overview of how we use Notion to build this here thing called Distant. So we've called Distant in Instagram Level Up a handful of times, and it's not entirely figurative. Beth and I only swapped hellos in person a few times before getting swept up in a conversation about feeling disconnected within the industry, our peers, with our own creativity. And so what you're looking at here is a lot of voice memos back and forth, where I was sharing a super loose concept of a magazine Nick and I had discussed a few times called Distant, and Beth shared how she was craving a space for everyone to coalesce and share things, be it work related or otherwise. And then it happened. We had so many ideas. And we found, honestly, from the start, that the best place to hold those ideas and organize them and comment on them and refine them and keep track of them was on Notion. So this is a bit of how the sausage is made or was made. It's a view of our internal Notion, and it looks nice and built out today, but we started literally by putting digital pen to paper. We weren't super concerned, as Nevin kind of recommended, to not get bogged down by all of the different ways you could start. We just did by starting a page and getting going. So a lot of our pages looked kind of like this. They were big lists, either bulleted or checklisted, about experiences that we wanted to deploy in our Slack. And we use these as ways to document things that we talked about during our meetings or things that came up asynchronously. We were able to tag whoever needed eyes on the ideas or plus upped ideas that we really wanted to pursue. So you can see some of that throughout here. And you saw some members actually show you how to do those things earlier on in this presentation, but this is just kind of an at a glance of how messy we were. Sprinkled between those lists and thought parking included brand documentation. So from the start, we really wanted to define distance focus and purpose, and have a very clear reference point as we made new moves and added new friends into the fold. So while we could be messy, we also tried to button up a little bit where it counted. A huge part of our use of Notion when building Distant was our beta phase process. So before we kind of opened our virtual doors to anyone who wanted to join, we had a few select pools of people that we had kind of pressure test this idea of Distant. And luckily it was successful, but here was where we were able to catalog their information. So who they were, what their contact info was, and whether or not they accepted our invite. And it came in handy when we solicited their feedback too. So one singular space for the four of us to view progress and what we could improve on before we opened our virtual doors to more folks was really important. And because Notion kept us honest and organized, getting together was a lot less stressful. Here's us making some fun stuff to announce that we were no longer in beta. But I'd say the best part of Notion in relation to what we've been doing here at Distant is the ability for us to share what this community is, who it's comprised of, and what we've made transparently, and with anyone who's curious enough to poke around. So we've built an external home base on Notion that's linked on our site and on our Instagram, so that both potential members and current members have access to all the things that they'd ever need to know. We've got a straight and narrow welcome page that gives us some guidance on how to use this particular Notion space. We have tools to direct folks on how to nominate new members and what our process of granting submission looks like. We have all of our channels listed in a directory, exactly how they might show up in your Slack sidebar if you decide to add them to your pool of conversations. And one of my favorite, and dare I say, one of the most powerful Notion pages that we've made is our member directory. It was optional for our beta users and for a while after we went public, but this space has proven to be an invaluable resource to get to know everyone who's available in Slack and beyond. So it's been such a gift to see like where everyone calls home, what they're up to, what fun facts about themselves they want to share with a bunch of friendly strangers, and where they've parked a piece of themselves online outside of Slack on Spotify or LinkedIn if you're about that kind of thing. I only see us continuing to find new ways to use Notion for distant connection, like our city guides that members have curated over the past year or so. If you haven't taken a look through them, I cannot recommend doing so more. It's a perfect snapshot of the generosity of the people in this space. There's so many recommendations with personalized tips on why their spot's worth visiting. And it takes online friendship offline in a really beautiful way. So I'll end on a quote from a friend of distance, Marcel the Shell. Marcel said that there's all these people and we're all looking at the same thing and we're all doing the same thing. It's beautiful and it feels like, I don't even know how to describe it. It feels like something, it's really lovely. One of my favorite things about this space is that we've all made each other, or what we've all made for each other is that persevering spirit of sharing. So we can all be working on different projects, on different paths, living in different neighborhoods or states or even countries, but tools like Notion allow us to build reference points together, share knowledge, and make it known to all and grow together. So it's been, and I bet it will continue to be, a really special thing. But if I had a big headline, is just start typing, and you can finesse the formatting later. Ooh.
Love that. That was very beautiful, very well said. In the next progression of this event, we're going to get into our Q&A. So I pulled a few from the chat earlier that I'm going to run through. One of the questions that I think we got about two that kind of line up with this, but this is for everyone. How much time do you spend inputting information on Notion? And I think along with that is kind of also talking about maybe like how long the setup is versus how long, or like how much time you're spending on that after. Like I know for me personally, it might take me a little bit to like build the format of what I want to do in that page specifically, but then my time spent in it after that isn't as excessive. So want to hear from you all.
I can go. I'm still on like an adrenaline rush from presenting. I think it varies. Like the to-do list, super straightforward. Like I hop in, hop out, same with the grocery list. Like those, there are like definitely places where I'm trying not to like finesse the format, which is also like why I don't budget in Notion. I do that in a sheet because I need like the most simple and like boring space to not get distracted. But then things like my oatmeal doc or like my garden, like those definitely take probably a couple hours plus, like depending, like the garden I feel like took longer just because I'm like researching a ton of stuff. I don't know. It depends how like hyped I am about what I'm working on. But again, mine are like very personal. So I'm curious like what someone using like Notion more for like work would say.
I feel like it's about the same. Like if I think something is going to be super high yield, like again, type A. So I will like sink some mega time into something. Like I recently did like a little recipe tracker for myself because I fucking never save anything to like a folder on my Instagram saved. So I was like, I'm just going to put this into a Notion database. And I spent like an obscene amount of time actually like getting my stupid little like photos in place and like actually like formatting it the way that I wanted to. But now whenever there's something that I want to add, it's a template. So it takes like way less time to just drop it in. But if you're not sure that you're going to use it, I'd say probably err on the side of like, keep it simpler first.
Totally. I think I feel very similarly. I think it definitely varies the amount of time that I put into it, but my approach changed drastic because I think I've been using Notion for a really long time and not overwhelmed. I think I was really overwhelmed when I first started. But once I like quit cold turkey and started again and just started again with the categories, it really helped me just to like put in stuff a little bit here, a little bit there, and then like remember like, oh, actually that's pretty interesting. Maybe I'll dive in and do a little bit more. And so like I like to think about Notion as a garden and like treating it as your own little project of things that can be built up and shared with others, and like you tend to it however it makes the most sense for you. But it's something that like you should not rush into, I think. And I think maybe just like doing a little bit at a time. I think another thing that I try to do for myself is that like I have horrible, severe ADHD. And so like the only way that I can stay consistent with things like this is if I have a system behind it. And so like I'll have a reminder on my phone to like, if it's recipe pulling, I'll like have a reminder for like my Notion culling. So I'll go through and like pull everything from the different sources into Notion if that's where I want my sort of like central source to be. And yeah, I think that's how much time I spend on it definitely varies on the thing, but like the little plant guide that I made in like 20 minutes and just but you know, the other stuff can, even the more simpler things could take hours, so definitely varies.
Word. Okay. I think another question that we have that I think a few people can touch on, but thinking about team processes, can Notion do flow charts, Gantt charts, or connect with something that does that? I know Bianca, I know you kind of like went through the team process, and Lindsay, you kind of showed workflows with working with different team members and things like that. But Nevin brought up in the chat talking about like integration and APIs and things. So I think I want to get maybe some input on what are some things you can add or like work in combination with Notion to level it up. So I'm gonna point this to you, Nevin.
Yeah, I think there are a couple ways that this can look. One is like the very obvious way of like plugins. So, or what do they actually call it? Maybe it's just integrations. But there are different things that you can just like within Notion, you can connect to a bunch of different things, and you can even like if it's a web page, you can just embed a web page. But they have a lot of like random a whole marketplace full of apps that connect to Notion very easily and seamlessly. The stuff, and I don't use those at all, just because if it's my central place, I try to like only use links rather than like windows into other places. But it's completely up to, you know, however you want to set things up. The things I'm pretty interested in, as far as like automation goes, I think Notion can be really powerful for that, is that like the API, because it is a database, the Notion API can be used for pushing data to Notion, which is really powerful, not just through the Notion app, of which is super helpful, but like I mentioned on iOS and on, you know, Chrome browsers and whatever browser you use probably. But I mention APIs in that like you can, something that I've been interested in lately is like creating apps or creating like Chrome plugins or creating things that can point stuff to Notion. And I'm sure that there's some that are available as Chrome plugins as well, but like this gets into the whole conversation of AI, but like all of this, there are so many things that we don't have to learn in order to implement things that like previously we would need like a whole developer and a whole strategist and a whole designer to be able to like create, where, you know, you could, with a few tries of prompting ChatGPT or chat whatever, you can have it either teach you how to do it or do it for you, which is very exciting. So that's how I've been experimenting with that kind of stuff, but I'm curious what other people have as far as yeah, integrating Notion with other stuff.
You seem to be the only one, unless
Yeah.
Beth, you had something.
I don't mess around with anything else.
I mean, it's also nice because it is such a simple tool, or like it can be as simple or complex as it needs as you want it to be. So, you know, if you're integrating a Gantt chart, it could just be a PNG of a Gantt chart, or, you know, or you could do a full integration with different APIs and stuff like that, but it's as simple or complex as you need it to be.
Wait, I have a silly question. Is a Gantt chart not the timeline view? Is there
It
more?
is.
Okay,
Yeah, it kind of is, yeah.
Because I know that there's definitely more stuff in the timeline, like when I was trying to like, oh, I was watching this guy on YouTube talk about Notion, like all the like function stuff, and it was making my head hurt. But I know that there's more capabilities in the timeline, like you can create like parent and like child, like, I don't know, relationships or dependencies. So there's definitely stuff in there for Gantt charts that is like,
Yeah.
but I just haven't. It's too advanced.
Yeah, so it's very funny because I started using Notion in like 2018, and I don't feel like there was a ton happening. And then now, and I just like I'm stuck in my ways. So when I go and look at whether it be templates or like table views and stuff, I'm like, oh my God. I feel like that's how I feel with Arena too. I'm like, whoa, there was not this much here. I think we have one more question, which I think will be fun because I'm also curious, but from Josephine, have you guys tried integrating your local calendar, whether that be iPad, Cal, etc., with Notion? What do you think of it? Would you prefer to keep it as two separate things altogether? Thanks.
I haven't done much in terms of integrating calendar. I feel like it would have to be like super rooted in like a problem that I'm feeling, and Google Calendar like really does it for me. Like I don't feel any pain points there where I'm like, oh shoot, I wish I could like link this up, but I could see it being interesting to just like drop a link to your meeting notes like in your calendar invite. Like if I'm preparing an agenda or something ahead of time, to just like link that page, but it's definitely not like how you would say like a proper integration. But yeah, I'm curious maybe to even hear like if you have a pain point or like what the need might be to integrate the calendar to begin with, if that makes sense.
I've found at least within the realm of planning for distant or event specific timelines, it's nice to just use the Notion timeline function or the Notion calendar function and just kind of plot out what's relevant for what we're working against and not have it all in one place. I don't know if that's particularly helpful, but you know, I think you can get as granular with this kind of expansive set of tools instead of, you know, integrating other things that already exist if need be. So I think that like I understand the need to have a calendar in there every now and again, but you can do that within Notion and plot just what you need to see in, you know, the realm of the event or whatever you're working against.
Yeah, I feel like that pretty much sums it up because I feel like when it comes to calendars or like date specific things within Notion, it's usually for me like a project based thing or just like work, like due dates and stuff in general. But like for my personal calendar, like I like to keep things separate because I do feel like a hard thing is like with tools, it's very easy to integrate your life with all the things you're doing, but like a few degrees of separation is usually like pretty healthy. So like I definitely do my normal like I need to like ship this thing like what Beth kind of had going through how she sets up lists. But I think separation is good in certain instances. I think we have pretty much covered all the pressing things. So
Yeah, I think
gonna be it for Q&A.
if there are more questions, we are online. We are on Slack, we are on Instagram. But thank you everyone for joining this conversation. We always have so much fun putting these together, and then hearing from everyone who wants to share. So keep your eyes peeled for more. And like I said, please join us on Slack and elsewhere. We have a lot of other fun things that we're working against, and want to put out there in the world with you all. So please be a part of it, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Bianca.